A sailor breaks the rules 5,000 miles from home. There are no courts nearby, no lawyers, no way off the ship, and yet within days, that sailor loses rank, loses pay, loses their freedom to leave, all without a single trial. This has been happening in the U.S. Navy for over 60 years, and most Americans have never heard of it. This system is called the captain's mast. It is one of the most quietly powerful legal tools in the entire U.S. military. And it only works the way it does because of one thing, the ocean itself. Stay with us, because what you're about to learn about how discipline works aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier will completely change the way you think about military justice. And before we go further, if you or someone you love has ever served in the U.S. Navy, drop a comment right now. Let us know what branch they served in. We want to hear from our military community today. The floating city. Now here's something that most people do not realize. A U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is not just a warship. It is a fully functioning city. The average carrier holds between 4,500 and 5,500 sailors and aviators. At any given time, it has its own hospital, its own post office, its own barbershop, its own power plant, and even its own TV station. It runs around the clock, every single day, for months at a time without stopping. And like any city with that many people, things go wrong. Sailors get into fights. Some drink when they are not supposed to. Some fail to show up for duty. Some make decisions that put themselves or their shipmates at risk. Out in the middle of the ocean, the Navy cannot simply call the local police. It cannot ship a sailor off to jail on the mainland. It cannot pause the mission to hold a 6-week court hearing. So what does it do? It handles everything right there on the ship, swiftly, firmly, and with a level of commanding officer authority that no other branch in the military quite matches. The tool it uses to do that has a name most civilians have never heard, but every single sailor who has ever put on a Navy uniform knows it instantly. And most of them do not want to be anywhere near it. It is called Captain's Mast. What is Captain's Mast? The name itself goes back centuries. Long before modern warships existed, wooden sailing ships had something called a mast, and the tall vertical pole that held the sails. When a sailor did something wrong, the ship captains would gather the entire crew at the foot of that mast and deal with the offender right there, in front of everyone. It was fast, it was public, and it made a strong impression on every single person watching. Today, the mast has no sails, but the principle is the same. The commanding officer sits at one end of the table, the accused sailor stands at attention at the other, the entire chain of command lines up along the side, and the commanding officer, who is judge, jury, and sentencing authority all at once, hears the case and delivers a verdict. Right then and there. The last part is worth repeating. The same officer who runs the ship, sets the mission, and leads the crew is also the one who decides whether you are guilty and how hard you are punished. There is no outside judge. There is no civilian jury. It is entirely an internal command proceeding. Now, in most areas of the U.S. military, a service member who faces this kind of non-judicial punishment has a choice. They can accept the captain's mast hearing, or they can reject it and demand a formal court-martial instead, where there is a real judge, real lawyers, real rules of evidence, and the full constitutional standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But here's the part that changes everything when you are on an aircraft carrier. Once that ship leaves its home port and heads out to sea, that choice disappears. The vessel exception, the key that locks it all. Under Article 15 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ, there is a specific rule called the vessel exception. It has been part of the U.S. military law since 1962. What it says is simple and absolute. A sailor who is attached to or embarked in a vessel cannot refuse non-judicial punishment. Full stop. The right to demand a court-martial instead, a right that every other service member in the Army, the Air Force, and the Marines, that right simply does not exist for a deployed Navy sailor at sea. The commanding officer has the authority to proceed directly to captain's mast. No opt-out, no alternative route. The sailor stands there, and the CO decides. The legal reasoning behind this was practical. When a ship is deployed in the middle of the Pacific or the Persian Gulf, there are no courts available. Witnesses cannot be easily gathered. Flying a sailor home for a trial costs the mission time, money, and manpower. The Navy cannot spare. And discipline at sea has to be fast because a poorly disciplined crew on a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier is not just a morale problem, it is a national security problem. So the Congress gave the commanding officer of a deployed vessel a power that almost no other military commander in peacetime has, the power to punish without the accused being able to say no. The punishments, what actually happens. So what exactly can a commanding officer do to a sailor at captain's mast? The punishments are serious and they hit hard, but they all have one thing in common. The sailor stays on the ship. They keep doing their job, they keep serving the mission, they just do it under a cloud that is going to follow them for a long time. The first and most immediate punishment is a reduction in rank. A sailor who has spent years earning their way up to a petty officer second class can be knocked straight back down to petty officer third class, or even lower, in a single hearing. That means not just less authority and less respect from peers, but a direct cut in their monthly paycheck. That takes effect immediately. The second is forfeiture of pay. Under the law, a commanding officer can order a sailor to forfeit a portion of their basic pay for up to 1 full year. Think about what that means. A young sailor trying to send money home to support a family back in the States, trying to keep up with car payments or rent near their home base, suddenly losing a significant chunk of every paycheck every month for 12 months straight while still working the same brutal hours. The third is restriction to the ship. This one hits especially hard. When the carrier pulls into a foreign port, somewhere like Bahrain, Yokosuka in Japan, or Rota in Spain, other sailors get liberty. They get to go ashore, see the city, eat real food, breathe air that is not recycled through a warship ventilation system. A restricted sailor stays on board. They watch their shipmates walk down the gangway, and they stay behind. The fourth is extra duty. On top of an already exhausting schedule, often 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, a sailor on extra duty gets assigned additional work. More cleaning, more maintenance, more physical labor, all on top of whatever their regular job demands. The fifth is correctional custody. This is a physical restraint. A sailor under correctional custody is confined during duty and non-duty hours alike, and may be assigned hard labor. They are not a civilian prison, but they are not free either. They are locked into a punitive routine on a ship they cannot leave. And finally, there is a punitive letter of reprimand. No fine, no rank reduction, just a letter. But that letter goes into the sailor's permanent service record. It follows them to every future assignment, every promotion board review, every re-enlistment decision. A single letter can quietly end a career that might otherwise have lasted 20 years. Why the system is built this way. Now think about what all of these punishments have in common. None of them remove the sailor from the ship. None of them interfere with the carrier's mission. The sailor keeps showing up, keeps working, keeps fulfilling their duties, just at a lower rank, with less pay, with no freedom to leave, and with a record that will dog them for years. That is the genius of the system. That is what makes it work. Because sending a sailor home in the middle of deployment is actually a terrible outcome for the Navy. It removes a trained person from a position that needs to be filled. It signals to the rest of the crew that misbehavior is a ticket back to the shore. It costs the mission, and it rewards the wrong behavior. The punishment is designed to be felt aboard the ship, in the sailor's pocket, and on their career record, while keeping the warship fully operational. The burden of proof. Here is something that may surprise you. The standard of proof at a captain's mast is not the same as a criminal court. In a civilian court of law, the standard is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That means the government has to be so sure of guilt that no reasonable person could disagree. At captain's mast, the standard is called preponderance of the evidence. That means the commanding officer simply has to believe it is more likely than not that the offense happened. A 51% certainty is enough to impose punishment. That is a dramatically lower bar, and it means that in a closed, uncertain case, a case that might be thrown out or end in acquittal in a real court, the commanding officer can and often does find guilt and impose punishment anyway. And the sailor on an operational carrier cannot refuse, cannot demand a higher standard, cannot walk away and insist on a courtroom. They stand at attention and they accept what the CO decides. Rights the sailor does have. Now, to be fair, the system does have protections built in. The sailor is told in writing what the charges are. They are given the right to remain silent under Article 31 of the UCMJ. They can bring a spokesperson, not a lawyer, to stand with them. They can present their own evidence and call witnesses, as long as those witnesses are already aboard the ship, and their testimony does not delay operations or cost the Navy money. And after the punishment is handed down, the sailor has the right to appeal within 5 calendar days, in writing, to the next higher commander. That appeal can reduce the punishment, but it cannot make it harsher. However, the sailor on that carrier does not have a defense attorney present. They do not have the right to cross-examine witnesses with legal precision, and they cannot stop the hearing from happening. The 2024 GAO report. The U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO, published a major report in April of 2024 that raised serious concerns about the entire vessel exception system. The GAO found that the data that the Navy keeps on how often and how aggressively commanding officers use the vessel exception is inaccurate and incomplete. The Navy was supposed to build an automated tracking system for this data by October 2022. As of the GAO's report, that goal had still not been met because of funding constraints. The result is that neither the Navy itself nor the United States Congress has full visibility into exactly how many sailors are being punished this way and under what circumstances. Life inside the punishment. And here is where it gets even more interesting. The vessel exception does not just cover physical punishment, it shapes the entire social and psychological experience of life on a deployed carrier. Consider what a restriction order means when you are on a ship. It is not like being told to stay in your apartment. You are already locked in an environment where you cannot go anywhere. The ocean is your prison wall. A sailor below deck on a nuclear carrier may go for weeks at a time without ever seeing daylight. They sleep in a rack, a bunk stacked 3 high, in a compartment shared with around 60 other people. They have almost no personal space. The noise from jet operation above them is constant. When the ship pulls into port and you are restricted, you are not just losing shore leave, you are losing the only break from the environment that you are going to get for months. Other sailors come back laughing, talking about what they saw, what they ate, what the city was like, and you missed it. That social and psychological weight is part of how the punishment works. Real world example, USS George Washington, 2024. A real and very recent example of all this playing out in public happened in late 2024 when the USS George Washington arrived at its new home port in Yokosuka, Japan. Within days of arriving, sailors were reportedly arrested for drunken behavior ashore. The Navy response was not to fly problem sailors home. It was not to hold lengthy investigations. The commanding officer imposed collective liberty restrictions across parts of the crew and took steps to immediately curb alcohol access. Swift, ship internal, keeping the mission intact. The ship had previously made headlines for a deeply troubling cluster of sailor suicides during an extended maintenance period. The USO, aware of how isolating and psychologically taxing long deployments are, had placed one of its ship-based centers aboard carriers, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and the USS Abraham Lincoln, specifically to provide sailors with a human space, comfortable seating, games, television, ways to contact home, because the mental weight of being confined at sea for 9 or more months is real and significant. The 2023 reform. In 2023, the Navy made an important clarification to the vessel exception through a formal guidance document called ALNAV 091/23. Under this updated guidance, a commanding officer can only invoke the vessel exception and therefore deny a sailor their right to refuse captain's mast when the ship is actually operational. A vessel that is sitting in dry dock for major maintenance or modernization is not considered operational. Sailors on those ships regain the right to refuse. It was a meaningful step, but for thousands of sailors deployed at sea, at any given time on the Navy carrier's fleet, the exception still applies with full force. Closing facts and scale. Over 20,000 Navy and Coast Guard members face captain's mast proceedings every single year. Most of them never appear in any public record. The findings are generally not released to the media. They do not produce criminal convictions, but they permanently enter a service member's record, affecting promotions, re-enlistment, security clearance, and career assignments for the rest of their time in uniform. That is the quiet machinery behind discipline on the world's most powerful warships. Not a civilian court, not a public trial, not a transfer home, just a commanding officer at the head of a table, the ocean surrounding the ship on every side, and a sailor who must stand there and accept what comes next. The men and women who serve aboard U.S. aircraft carriers accept conditions that most of U.S. will never fully understand. They live in cramped quarters, they work 12-hour shifts in extreme heat, they go months without seeing their families, they operate some of the most dangerous equipment on the planet, and they do it all under a system of discipline that is more direct, more immediate, and more commanding officer-centered than almost anything else in American law. That system exists because it has to. A nuclear-powered aircraft carrier operating in a contested area of the world cannot pause its mission for a court hearing. Discipline must be fast, firm, and final. And for over 60 years, that is exactly what the vessel exception and the captain's mast system have delivered. Whether you agree with every aspect of how it works or not, one thing is not in dispute. The sailors who serve under that system, who accept these conditions, take the oath, and go out to sea anyway, deserve every bit of respect and recognition this country can give them. Outro. That is the story of how U.S. aircraft carriers handle discipline without ever sending a sailor home. If you found this video worth your time, do something simple right now. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Every time you do, it helps us bring more stories like this one to people who care about our military and the men and the women who serve in it.